for those of you I haven't met, my name is Andrea Wilson. I work on the strategy team.
And my name is Collin Cornwell. I help to run the products and services team at iProspect.
Yep. So today we're going to be talking about creating and measuring content for a strong ROI. And before we do that, we of course are going to have some fun because some of you have seen the beads already, is you have the opportunity to win some to be the envy of your friends all day. So, and tonight for sure. So the first question, and just shout out the answer, and whoever gets closest fast first wins. What is New Orleans' Mardi Gras ROI? Any guesses? 40%.
From a 1 to 1. Like
40 to
$1
1.
in, $1 back.
Well, I guess that's really not a 40 to 1. That would be
Any
like
thoughts?
a 0.5 to 1.
You know you want some beads.
Anyone else?
26.
10 to 1. You guys are saying all weird numbers.
All over the
Yes, these are crazy. I need something a little lower.
4 to 1.
A 4 to 1.
4 to
Thank you, Natalie. We're anywhere else?
Less than 1?
No. Okay, so Natalie wins. Nick was a little off. So it's actually 8.5 to 1. Is how. So for what they put in and then what they get back, it's an 8.5 to 1. Yeah. Surprise. Okay, so now let's talk content specifically. So what we're going to talk about is our unique approach to driving positive business outcomes and strong ROI through content. And there are 2 pillars to do that. The first is actually creating strong content in the first place. And then the second is ensuring that you are measuring it accurately. So that's what we're going to talk you through.
But before we continue, some other questions with no opportunities to win additional beads. I apologize. But show of hands, how many of you all have a definition for content or specifically content marketing? Is it defined within your organization or is it just content? Yes, no, definition, kind of, sort of? Well, we have a definition for it. And our definition is essentially a variety of assets that connect to a brand's consumer base to increase awareness, engagement, and ultimately drive business outcomes or business value. We're leaning more towards this because so much of it is measurable, but engagement is still going to have some sort of play when it comes to content and ROI. If you think about it, technically everything is content. Our go-to-market strategy at iProspect is data-led, but everything else that we do really revolves around content. I mean, if you think about things like ad copy, site content, blog content, I mean, technically speaking, like it's all content. So some Content Marketing Institute stats kind of show you where people are spending their time and money and efforts along those lines, but it's a big nut to crack, and essentially everything that we're all doing on a daily basis ties back to content. So question number 2, no chance for beads, I apologize. Should you measure content using standards for performance, like think analytics KPIs, or is it more of a branding and engagement play? Yes, no, 1, both? Okay, good. Well, we've got some really smart folks. I mean, yes,
They're paying
both.
attention.
Yes, both. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, we're kind of leaning more towards like the real measurement aspects of content these days. I mean, of course, we're going to look at things like engagement. We've got some cool stats that we can share with you throughout the presentation, but everything's measurable, and looking at things from an analytics perspective is key. We feel that we really need to tie our efforts from an asset and an amplification perspective. In all things content, we need to look through this lens, which is essentially the purchase journey. So this is a new way of looking at things for us, but it makes perfect sense if you think about it. So if you've got search campaigns, you probably have ad groups set up for these same processes. So why not would we do the same thing for content marketing? So that's what we're going to be speaking to throughout the presentation.
So the first pillar is how to create strong content in the first place that will deliver your ROI. So the very first step is setting up a framework. And hopefully you'll adapt to our framework. You can use any one you want. But the bottom line is making sure that your organization is on board and everybody understands the process, and that any types of content are created kind of go through these same steps. So the first step within our framework is research and strategy. And that's really about looking at what your consumers are doing, how they're consuming content, what your on-site behavior looks like, and then setting up an initial measurement plan. We have a lot of tools that can help with this, and we are at your disposal, so please let us help you with this process. The second step is aligning that content to the research and strategy that was just done, and making sure that you are developing various versions of assets so that you can optimize and react in real time when consumer results come in. The third step is measurement, and so we'll get into this a lot in just a little bit, but it's really about making sure that you're setting up your content for success, to make sure that you're looking at the right things based on the way that the content will react based on the consumer. The fourth step is amplification, and this is really where a lot of ROI comes in. So it's dialing up things that are doing really well and then dialing back on those that aren't. And then the fifth step is about the learning. So this is not only applying those learnings to your content iteration the next time around to make it stronger, but it's also about sharing it with your organization. And so this is something that a lot of people don't do, is make sure that your content's results are not only being shared with those content teams that work on it, but the whole organization. Because this is really where people learn things, and this is where new ideas are spurred, and this is where new business insights and new business opportunities can grow, and you can actually build off of a lot of success to build bigger opportunities for your company. The second step is setting up an intelligent strategy going in. And this is really about looking at your overarching business goals as a business as a whole and making sure that the content you create aligns to and delivers on that goal. So for example, if you were trying to reach a new consumer audience, then the content that you create should actually be looking at the growth in that new consumer audience. The other step is looking and understanding people as people versus just data points. So looking at either your data or our data. A lot of you probably have heard about CCS, which is Dentsu Aegis's proprietary consumer survey. And what's really great about this is it not only tells us the types of consumer or the types of content that they like, but also their media behaviors, what their lifestyles and passion points are, and really more about the motivations behind why they're doing what they're doing. And that's what's really helpful, because then you can connect really particularly and specifically with that consumer by learning how to motivate them with your content. Even thinking about Ariana Huffington yesterday, and she talked about how consumers want to escape, they want to lead a meaningful life, they want solutions, they want inspiration. Thinking about creating content that aligns to that will probably help you connect with them as well. And then the third piece is taking actions in the moment that matter that will really increase your ROI. So at first, it's again aligning content to the research and strategy, but also looking at the white space. So looking at what competitors are doing or not doing and the questions that consumers are asking that no one else is answering and you have the opportunity to create content to do. That's really where you will be seeing success within your content creation. But then also creating a measurable activity from zero. So this is really helpful because it helps with incrementality. So a new event, a new product launch, a new campaign, a new way of speaking, and then obviously when there's no other clutter in conversation in the marketplace, and that helps you really look at what your specific efforts are doing from a level playing field of zero. And then the third thing is amplification. So again, it's bringing those things up that are doing well. And it's not only focusing on the channel that you've created that initial content for, but it's distributing it out in the right ways to the places that make sense to make sure that that reach and engagement, and especially reach, is growing across all of those different groups. So one of the examples we wanted to talk about is Bobbi Brown. And this consumer, this was really about Retouching Collection, which was their brand new product launch. So again, we had a measurement activity of 0 to start. And then also looking at consumer data, we knew that we had to create how-to videos on social because that was the best way to reach that consumer. So that was done. And then from an amplification standpoint, it was all about distributing that content through display ads, through social links, as well as through search links as well as social. So really making sure that that content that was expensive to build was actually being showcased through the right way. And one of the things that we looked at, which is kind of an untraditional KPI, is the results in Google search demand and how that lifted for that specific product collection. And through this launch is about an 83% lift. So it's just another way to look at the effectiveness of your content versus just an engagement rate on that ad, for example.
So steps 1, 2, and 3 really help us to identify and outline not only the audience, but the types of content that we should be producing, which would include the content assets. 4, 5, and 6 is our thoughts around a framework to make sure that it's actually measurable. So I will say, going back to the funnel here, paying attention to where things sort of connect and overlap is going to be key, but we think it's important to prioritize the content marketing efforts to, again, sort of fit into the decision-making process of all of these users. So specific to awareness, right? So CCS and all of the other research things that we do are going to tell us essentially what we think those assets should be based on user behaviors and opportunities. Those KPIs and guiding metrics are going to be specific to those individual activities and assets that are being pushed out. So from an awareness perspective, maybe it's things, and this is going to be different based on client, brand, campaign, et cetera. We're suggesting that you essentially do something like this or go through an exercise like this for every content marketing campaign. But let's just say videos as an example. Maybe reach and impressions. Those are the two things that are of utmost importance to you and your organization. Once you get down to consideration and interest, you're going to have those same content asset types because you're going to carry those people or hope that you carry them all the way through the funnel. But now maybe we're doing things because they're familiar with the brand with some of the chatbots. We mentioned that in a session just yesterday. I mean, if people like a page and they're interacting with the bot, we need to make sure that we have some form of content to respond. But specifically, maybe email newsletters, for example. After we've got their email address, the KPI is probably going to change. And maybe now it's percentage of return visitors. Going a little bit further down into the funnel. Purchase. We've got some Leapfrog folks here in the room and a pretty awesome session, Lab 8, I believe it is. So we think we have some new capabilities and probably some new awesome things that we're going to be discovering in the next couple of months with them. But we're going to have the same assets as far as purchase that fall under consideration and interest. But now maybe we're looking at things like new customer lift, new subscribers, et cetera, et cetera. Last step in the funnel is post-sale. So all of these other assets totally apply, and we want to leverage those. But now it's about upsell and cross-sell. How do we get people to join the loyalty program? How do we make sure that we're getting that hook in them, from a lifetime value perspective? It's going to be different content assets because it's a different stage within that funnel. I think this is key too. I know it's small. I mean, asset types, they're always going to overlap. And we're not saying that this is what you should do for your company or your brand, but we think that this is a pretty good way to set it up so you can actually measure success of the content. Step 5, it's making sure that you set the right pace for actually analyzing and reacting. I think we heard a lot yesterday from Sam, from Jeremy Hull. I think Mike Gullickson talked about just how quickly things are changing. One of my favorite sessions yesterday was actually with Brittany and Pinterest. I mean, the fact that 50% of the user base is now men, if we're trying to reach those, I mean, that's a relatively recent change. So we need to be fairly agile and nimble. And if that's the audience that we're trying to reach, we may need to rethink our whole content production strategy, our amplification strategy, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the second thing here is yes, we need to be fast and nimble, but we also need to make sure that we're setting the proper cadence for what we're doing. Because as Andrea said, content does take time sometimes. So if you push it out there, you can't just immediately pull it back. You need to give the content enough time to sort of react before you make the decision that this isn't going to work, I'm going to pull the plug. And step 6 is really understand and stare the value in the face, if you will. Looking at those micro trends, Andrea mentioned, there were things that took place within social spaces that had a direct impact on search behaviors and branded search queries for one of the case studies that she referenced. We didn't know that. And if we were stuck in the weeds, yes, we need to stay in the weeds, but we need to also take a step back and take a look at other things. If we didn't do that, we never would have known. So how do we then incorporate the value that brings back into the conversation and back into the mix? We need to listen to the data and share the insights, breaking down the barriers. There's lots of groups within large organizations. If something's working, if something's not, we need to figure out ways to make sure that we're showcasing that information so that we can get their help and support to keep doing it, because it's all about applying what we do learn, revise the strategy, rinse and repeat, and do it over and over and over again.
Yay. So we thought it would be helpful to walk you through a client example from beginning to end. And so the example that we're going to showcase is IWC. So for those of you that don't know, IWC is a luxury, high-end, small Swiss watch brand. Got it? Got it. And they're focused on men's styles. So this brand is under the Richemont portfolio. There are a couple of Richemont people here, so if you see them, say hi. And their primary business objective was actually to reach women. So again, it's a men's brand. But as larger watches for women were coming into style, they thought, well, we have an opportunity for growth here by looking at those women that want something unique and want to be different and stand out. This is a way to do so. So that was the business objective. The campaign goals then were really to think about the brand appreciation, consideration, and awareness of IWC to this new specific consumer group of women. So what we did is we worked with IWC to build a profile in CCS, and we had very specific psychographic details on who we wanted this person to be that we knew would be interested in buying a luxury men's watch for themselves. And so through CCS, we can get a bunch of information. Just in the interest of time, we'll focus on those 3 key things that are most important for this case study. So from CCS, we learned that the content that this consumer really likes is informational, social posts, and expert advice. We also learned that through IWC's category, she prefers to hear about brands from social media, digital print magazines, and then other websites. And we also looked at her media footprint and her consumption patterns within media, and it looks like she was spending a lot of time reading content on business sites, fashion and lifestyle sites, social sites, things like that. So we were looking at, sites like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Harper's Bazaar, Blog Lovin', and then of course Instagram and Facebook. So what we decided from a strategy standpoint was to focus on influential blogger collaborations to be able to reach this consumer, and that we would do that through the Blog Lovin' network, not only because they had very influential bloggers within social, but also because they had a wide variety and a wide network where we were able to distribute content across all of those different lifestyle and interest sites that our consumer was interested in. So we created these collaborations. This is really all about the blogger talking about the brand, and then also distributing it through storytelling through different content pieces. In addition, whenever anything was doing well, there was amplification on the brand side by amplifying on their owned platforms to make sure that as consumers were initially becoming aware of IWC, that they were continuing to see storytelling that was helping refine their story and help aid consideration to help them see what the brand is like and how it needs to be the brand for them. So the next step was really aligning to that consumer journey. So as we mentioned before, this is really all about awareness of this consumer group. Again, going back to that business objective. So we knew that the content that was being created really needed to be top funnel, but we also knew that if somebody had already liked or started to follow some of the social postings from the brand itself, that they were at least now aware and starting to consider learning more about the brand. So that really can go further down the funnel, although you'll notice it's absolutely the top half that we're focusing on. And then as a result, for this tiny brand, over this 4 to 6 week time frame that these ads were running, they had about 18,000 engaged interactions. So again, this wasn't our end KPI, but it was telling us that this was working and that these were shares and comments and loves and posts that these women were doing based on the content that they'd seen. But most importantly, again, it's always going back to that business objective. And so they saw a 73% lift in women and site traffic specifically from women from those social networks. So obviously that collaboration worked effectively in driving to the new consumer that they were focused on. And something else to point out is, again, this was a 4-ish week time frame. Content doesn't die, and this is still up, and consumers are still learning about it and following it and sharing it. So we're really able to see that if you really want to measure the ROI, don't just end the reporting at the end of your campaign. Make sure that you're continuing to look past that and seeing that that content does have a life of its own that's continuing to evolve and bring money back to you.
So to recap, it's all about the strategy and identifying what you should be creating before you do anything else, and then coming up with a measurement framework for those assets that works for you and your organization. There is a cheat sheet that you all can take. You're probably going to have 8 of them by the end of the day. But we do have one more opportunity to maybe win some beads. So how much does Mardi Gras represent of New Orleans' annual GDP? So annual GDP for Mardi Gras as a whole.
As a percentage.
Percentage.
45%, 20%, 50, 73. Anyone else? 95. Who said 10? Trent did. Okay, so it's actually 1.5. Is that crazy? So it's really actually that low. So 10% was closest. And for the record, every single lab, everybody's been saying really high. So it's obviously there's a perception that all we hear about is Mardi Gras. So maybe New Orleans should talk about and develop some content beyond Mardi Gras. Thought?